We are going to be in Romans chapter 8 again this Sunday. We're going to do today in Romans chapter 8, and then next Sunday, the last part of Romans chapter 8. This part specifically that we're going to start out with, Romans chapter 8 verses 12 is where we're going to start. We're going to read this kind of in sections. Romans 8 verse 12 through 17, I wrote, and I had to write one of my exegetical papers on it. So I tried to leave a lot of that out of it, but I tried to focus in on the main point that I feel like we have to understand from this particular passage. So we are going to read, our passage is really going to be Romans chapter 8, verses 12 through, I believe it was 26. I think that's where it was. Maybe it's 27. I'll have to look in my... Yes, 27. But we're going to start out just with this Romans chapter 8, verses 12 through 17 to begin with, and then we'll kind of talk through that one. And that will help us understand the next part of the scripture where Paul talks. So, Romans chapter 8, verses 12 through 17. Paul says this, "Therefore, brothers and sisters, we have an obligation, but it's not to the flesh to live according to it. For if you live according to the flesh, you will die. But if by the Spirit you put to death the misdeeds of the body, you will live. For those who are led by the Spirit of God are the children of God. The Spirit you received does not make you slaves so that you live in fear again. Rather, the Spirit that you received brought about your adoption to sonship, and by him we cry, Abba, Father. The Spirit himself testifies with our spirit that we are God's children. Now, if we are our children, then we are heirs, heirs of God and co-heirs with Christ, if indeed we share in his sufferings, in order that we also may share in his glory." Our passages for today, Paul kind of talks about, one of the reasons why I did a larger section of this, is Paul talks about in this section about the here and now, but later on in this section that we have for today, he also talks about a future and the redemption of all things. So there's this aspect of the hope we have in the here and now and the hope we have in the future. And so that's kind of why I gave us this big long section for today. So this first part, Paul talks about our present. He starts out with another therefore, right? So taking all of the things that he's already said in Romans into account, taking all that Jesus has done for us, the framework that he set up there, who God is, that God wants to have a relationship with us moving forward, and Jesus gives us that path forward. Taking all of that into an account, we have an obligation, or we owe something. But Paul says we don't owe the flesh. We don't owe ourselves. And so if we're continuing on in what Paul has already said, this flesh and the spirit kind of are at odds, then we understand if we don't owe the flesh, then we owe the spirit, right? We owe God our loyalties. If we pay ourselves back, Paul is saying basically, if we pay ourselves back, we will die. But if we recognize that what we have in our life, we owe to God, we owe to our Creator, then we will be given this eternal life. The words that Paul uses here is this idea that Paul sets up most of the times in his scriptures, is that we will have a master of our lives. And so we can either take that as ourselves and be the master of our own lives, or we can follow God and he will be the one that directs our lives, right? He will be our master. This is the same thing that was presented to Adam and Eve in the garden, right? Do you want God to be your master, or do you want to be the master of yourself? Do you want to know the knowledge of good and evil, or do you just want God to tell you what is good and what is evil? And so it's kind of the same thing that humanity has been struggling with since the beginning, which is part of the reason why Paul brings up in this some of this Old Testament language, some of this Old Testament stories. He's reminding us that this is the story from the beginning of Israel. If we take this position of being led by the Spirit, if we take this position of God being our master, then we are considered children of God. And we want to remember this phrase because it will come up again. Paul says, if we take this position, then we are considered children of God. And the Spirit has brought about our adoption into sonship. Now, there's one key point that I feel like we really have to understand in what Paul is saying here. And it's one of the things that I wrote my exegetical paper over. I'm still just going to try to give a 1,000-foot overview, like not all into the intricacies. But we look at adoption in our time period very differently than how they looked at adoption back in that day. So when we adopt now, we adopt usually a child. A child comes into a family. The family saves the child, right? We'll put that in air quotes, saves the child from what could be. So they come in, and adoption, the family takes the child and says, we will adopt you and we will take care of you. Adoption in that time period wasn't for children per se. That would sometimes happen, but that wasn't the main point of adoption. So adoption usually at that point of time was an older male being adopted into a family, a grown man being adopted into the family. And the reason why he would be adopted into a family is to save the family, to save the lineage. You've probably heard they didn't have a legitimate heir, that line within when you look back through old literature. So they would adopt someone in and call them a legitimate heir, and this person would continue on in the family tradition. So they thought of adoption as kind of this vertical and horizontal way. So when a grown man would come in and be adopted into the family, he would take on the lineage of the family. He would cut ties, sever all ties with the family, his birth family, like his blood family. He would sever all of that, and he would come in and take in heir, like he would be in the line of generations. So he would take on this, he would go, well, Abraham is in my family line, right? He would take the lineage of the family, the ancestors of the family. He would also take and worship whatever God the family worshiped. We kind of see this within Scripture when we think of Ruth and Naomi, how Ruth said, where you go, I will go, and your God will be my God, and your family will be my family. And so it's kind of this language that the biblical text uses, and we don't necessarily always understand that really that's kind of the language of adoption in those days. So when someone came into the family and became heirs, they would cut all ties with all of their family, with all of their vertical and horizontal to begin with. They would take the ancestors, they would take the God. They would cut all of that from their old lives off. As I said, they would also take the horizontal in this. So the family that was still alive, he would take on a love for them. The country, if he was in a different country or the same country, he would take on loving and caring for that country and following whatever governor or whatever they had at that time, their governmental leaders, he would follow them and would cut all ties and everything with the life that he had lived before. He would have nothing to do with his former identity. He was brought in adoption to save the family line. That was his main point, was to save the family line and continue on what the goal that the family had. So when Paul speaks of our adoption into sonship, this is the overarching picture that he gives us, that he is thinking of as he uses this language. We are brought in to continue on the goal that the family had. When we are brought into through adoption into sonship, we take Abraham as our ancestor, right? We are brought into this family. We care for the family land. We take care of those who are in the family who are still living. We cut ties with all loyalties that we once had that was connected to our former lives. We cut ties with all loyalties that were from our previous family line. And we come in and we move towards the goal that the family has for us, that the family had previously. Part of the reason why Paul talks about God's righteousness. This was the goal from the beginning. When we're adopted into sonship, we take on this goal. We leave behind the patterns that our family has taught us, the mindsets, the pain, the scars, the thought patterns that they had given to us. We no longer look at things the way that our old family would have. We look at it the way that our new family would look at it. We leave all loyalties behind. So putting this in what Paul was saying, we leave all loyalties to the flesh behind, and we step in and we have this obligation to our family. We recognize that we are adopted in as children, as heirs. We are part of the family of God. And we take on the actions, the mindsets, the love of the family that we are in, right? We take on the actions, the mindsets, the love of God. And we work hand in hand with Christ towards this goal of redemption of all things. We are in the world, but not of it. This is the picture that Paul is painting, that we take on being an heir. We are co-heirs with Christ. And he brings us back in verse 17. Now, if we are children, then we are heirs, heirs of God and co-heirs with Christ, if indeed we share in his sufferings, in order that we also share in his glory. If we are in the family, if we have been adopted into sonship, if we are heirs, co-heirs with Christ, then we take on the joys and the suffering of the family. We rejoice with the family. We cry with the family. Coming back from what Paul had said earlier, therefore, taking all these things into account, we glory in our hope and we glory in our suffering. We rejoice in our hope and we rejoice in the suffering of the family. And this is the framework for our next few verses as we go through this. We're going to go into verse 18. I consider that our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us. For the creation waits in eager expectation for the children of God to be revealed. For the creation was subjected to frustration, not by its own choice, but by the will of the one who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be liberated from its bondage to decay and brought into the freedom and glory of the children of God. We know that the whole creation has been groaning as in the pains of childbirth right up to this present time. Not only so, but we ourselves who have the first fruits of the Spirit groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for our adoption into sonship, the redemption of our bodies. For in this hope we are saved. But hope that is seen is no hope at all. Who hopes for what they already have? But if we hope for what we do not yet have, we wait for it patiently. I think I went farther than I had asked you to, right, Adam? For the creation waits in eager expectation for the children of God to be revealed. Did we catch that one? I tried to make an emphasis on this. Creation awaits for who will participate or who will come to this position and participate in the restoration of all things. Creation groans, waiting for this to happen. Who will be the heirs of God that come in and take this lineage and participate in the restoration of all things? Who will come in and lead this family in the here and now? Who will come in and participate in this restoration? Who will give up the loyalties that they had to everything else and come into this family? Creation groans, awaiting to see who will be the children of God, who will be adopted into the sonship of God. Paul is pressing into this idea that this family includes not only the Israelites, but also the Gentiles. This is this new Israel that will walk towards God's ultimate plan. This will be the family that works towards the family's goal, the people that are adopted in to work towards this family goal. One of my favorite quotes from N.T. Wright, and I've probably used it before, takes all of this into account. And he says, the work of the cross is not designed to rescue humans from creation, but to rescue them for creation. You guys see that? The cross is not designed to rescue humans from creation. Yeah, okay, one day we'll get to heaven. But really, the cross was there to rescue humans for creation, so that we can come in and take on this goal that God has had from the beginning. A lot of times we think of it only as, I'm going to come in, I'm going to worship God, and I'm going to go to heaven. But there are things that we are called to do in the here and now, in creation. Paul is speaking, as I said, towards this restoration that will happen one day. This restoration of all things. This isn't just one day the world that we are in is just going to explode and we're going to find ourselves in heaven, right? That's not necessarily the picture that those writing the biblical texts are showing us. This is a restoration of all things, of all creation that's going to happen. God isn't just going to go, I don't like this anymore. I'm just going to destroy creation. He's invested in the redemption of his creation. And we are created to participate in this. God invites us to participate in this. God invites us to come in and to be adopted into sonship. But doing that, we have to leave our loyalties behind. We know that the whole creation has been groaning, as in the pains of childbirth, right up to the present time. Adam, are you going to put this back up on the screen? Not only so, I'm in verse 23. Not only so, but we ourselves who have the first fruits of the Spirit, have been some of the first ones to get the Spirit, groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for our adoption to sonship, the redemption of our bodies. For in this hope we are saved. But hope that is seen is no hope at all. Who hopes for what they already have? But if we hope for what we do not have, we wait for it patiently. In the same way, the Spirit helps us in our weakness. We do not know what we ought to pray for, but the Spirit himself intercedes for us through wordless groans. And he who searches our hearts knows the mind of the Spirit, because the Spirit intercedes for God's people in accordance with the will of God. Creation is groaning. We have been groaning, waiting for this hope of redemption. We sit in this time, this already but not yet, the time where Jesus has come and has given us the Spirit, right? He was the way that we have been given the Spirit, this gift. Jesus has come and given us a way to have a right relationship. But we still have this hope, this knowledge of what God has said, that one day he will redeem all things. We have this hope. We have this faith. When we come into the family, we have this faith. We have this hope. We know that this is the ultimate goal of the family. We hope for this even though we have not seen it yet. And even though we have this hope for the restoration of all things, we're still here on earth, and just like creation, we still are groaning, like the pains of childbirth. We know that something amazing is going to happen, but there's some pain right now. We've got to get through some of these struggles that we have to get to the final point, the next part of this. And this is the hope that we grasp hold of. This is the hope that we chain ourselves to. This is the hope that we don't lose sight of. Yeah, there might be some groaning now. And yeah, maybe even sometimes there's so much groaning that we don't even know what to pray for, what to say. But the Spirit intercedes for us through our wordless groans. We hold on to this hope that one day there will be a redemption of all things. So no matter what it looks like today, we hold on to that hope that one day there will be a redemption of all things. For we know, this may sound familiar, for we know that God works all things for the good of those who love him, who have been called into this position according to his purpose. We know that God is working this towards his goal of redemption of all things. We know that God is righteous, and this has been his goal from the beginning. God is righteous, but we are called to participate in this, to be co-heirs, and to be co-heirs with Christ. In other places, Paul calls it co-laborers with Christ. But again, this work that we do isn't to get a reward. This isn't just come into the family and just be part of the family, and then one day you'll be in heaven. We come into this family, we do the work in this family because we want to work towards the betterment of the goal that the larger family has, right? I know we oftentimes present the gospel in this idea of come to know Christ and you will go to heaven, and I'm not saying that that's wrong or that's untrue, but really, Jesus calls us to count the cost of discipleship, right? Jesus tells us to count the cost of discipleship, that this isn't just going to come in, we're going to come in and everything's going to be hunky-dory and sunshine and roses. And Paul is saying if we are truly living by the Spirit, if God is truly our masters and we are not back tying ourselves to our flesh, then our lives will reflect that, because we will have cut all ties and we would be working towards the greater good of the family. The last couple weeks we have talked about who is in charge. And we're still kind of doing that today. Again, it's a lot of what Paul is saying. But I want us to think about this as we think about adoption and how this is framed in Paul's mind as he's explaining this to us. I want us to think about, is there anything that we are still holding on to? Is there anything, any former loyalty that we had that we are still holding on to, that we haven't yet fully given that over to God? Is there any part of our lives that God has asked us to give up that we haven't? Are there any actions or words that are coming out of our mouth that show that we are not living in step with the Spirit? Thinking about it in the sense of adoption, are there any loyalties that we haven't severed? Are we fully sold out, working towards the redemption of all things? The way that we interact with each other, the way that we think about all of creation. Are we working hand in hand with Christ? Are we being co-heirs or co-laborers with Christ, working towards the redemption of all things? Maybe I'm making this question a little too broad for us, so I'm going to boil it down and ask a few questions that may be a little more personal. It may be the point of time where you go, okay, that stepped on a little bit of toes. Are there relationships, personal relationships that we have, that we know that we have hurt people, but we haven't taken any steps to reconcile that relationship? They should come to us. No, you go to them. If you're the one that caused that hurt, you go to them to reconcile that. Do we care about what happens to the earth? I mean, I know you guys are going to kind of be like, okay, but like, do we act that way? Do we recycle things? Do we care about what happens? Do we care about what happens to the animals in God's creation? Now, I'm not saying if you're going to hit a deer with your car to swerve into the ditch. That's not what I'm talking about. But do we care about what happens to the animals in God's creation? Because God cares. Do we care about, here's one of the big ones, do we care about what happens to other humans made in God's image? What about the poor and the immigrant and the widow, these ones that are constantly brought up in the biblical text? Do we care about what happens to them? The biblical text tells us that this is a redemption of all things. Not just the decay in humanity, but the decay that has happened in all of creation. A reconciliation of the decay that has happened in all creation. There's a reason why the biblical text calls this the redemption of all things. Have we ever looked at it in that way? Because we should. Because that is what the gospel teaches. That is the framework that the gospel gives us. Are there any actions or attitudes or thoughts that we still hold a loyalty to that we won't give up? If God shows us that there are things that He has asked us to give up, there are things that we do that we shouldn't necessarily do, and we don't understand sometimes about why we do the things that we do, we're still living in the flesh. And if we sever the ties of that loyalty, that is where the healing starts. We can take that step today and have the Spirit testify with our spirit to give us that assurance that we are children of God. We hold on to hope in any situation because these situations are not worth comparing to the glory that will be revealed in us. This is what Paul says, the passage that we read today. These situations in the here and now are not worth comparing to the glory that will be revealed in us that we are working towards. Have we fully taken that position that we are called to as children of God, adopted into this family, working towards the goal that God had from the very beginning? To be co-laborers with Christ. Like I said, Romans 8 is a pretty heavy chapter for Paul to write, which is why we're taking this in steps. I would encourage us to pray now and this week. Continue to pray, Lord, are there any loyalties that I am called to sever that I am not severing? Are there any things that you have called me to give up, whether that be actions, attitudes, mindsets, that you have called me to give up and I have continued to hold on to? I want to participate in the redemption of all things. I want to speak life into situations. I encourage us to think about that today. I encourage for us to think about that this week. We are going to close in the song, "O Come to the Altar," and you take whatever position God has called you to take, whether that's praying in your chair, whether that's praying down at the altar, whether that's just singing the words of this song. One of the reasons why I felt such a strong urge to use this song is we leave behind our regrets and mistakes. Come today. There's no reason to wait. We don't have to hold on to that hurt, that pain, that all of that was part of who we once were. We don't have to hold on to that any longer. We can have that assurance. We can have that testifying with the Spirit with our spirit. we can have that. We don't have to live in this not knowing. So here in a moment, we are going to sing, "Oh, Come to the Altar." As I said, you take whatever position it is that you feel like God is leading you to take, whether that's a prayer in your seat or singing the words or standing up and singing the words. However it is that whatever posture God has asked you to take, I want us to take that posture as we sing this song, and then I'll close us in prayer.